The views expressed on the following program are those of Dr. Lewis J. West and do not necessarily reflect the views or position of the University of Oklahoma or the OU Medical School. Good afternoon. I'm Dick John, and I'd like to welcome you to this Saturday afternoon's Point of View program. My guest this afternoon is an extremely well-known psychiatrist in Oklahoma City, Dr. Lewis J. West, who is head of the psychiatric department at the Oklahoma University School of Medicine. Dr. West has been with us on Point of View on occasions in the past. I think the last time, Doctor, was when you and Ernie Schultz discussed the significance of dreams. Is that right?
Yes.
The reason for you being here today has nothing, at least as far as I, a layman, know, has nothing to do with dreams. It basically has to do with your participation and public support in the sit-in demonstration downtown just a week ago today. I know you've had a great many people ask you in the ensuing 7 days why you took part, and we'll get into this in a minute. But first, I'd like to, as a first-hand participant, I'd like for you to tell me what happened.
Well, Dick, all I can tell you is what happened to me. The rest is hearsay, or what I read in the papers and see on television. I heard that a group of distinguished Negro physicians in town were planning to go down Saturday afternoon and expose themselves to whatever came. I had just gotten back to town from lecturing someplace and the night before, and I didn't have very long to think about it. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered whether perhaps I shouldn't go down there with them.
Are these people friends of yours? Are they associates?
A couple are fellow faculty members. Others are men in practice in town, but all of them very fine Negro leaders and physicians who've been serving this community for many years. So when they foregathered in one of the doctor's offices, I appeared too. Nobody really knew exactly how to proceed, so I just decided perhaps the thing for me to do is to invite them all to come with me for a cup of coffee. So we all went to a place for a cup of coffee, which was naturally the place where all the school children and others were. We went to the door. I asked if my friends and I could come in and be served, and we were told, no, you cannot come in with your friends. And there didn't appear to be anywhere to go, so we remained. We stood around for a while, and then after some time, sat down on the floor, and which made me think of the line from Ibsen that I told you about, that when one goes out to fight for freedom and truth, one should not wear one's best trousers. However, I sat there with the others for some time, and people picked their way through, and then the word came that there was no point in sitting there anymore. I believe the cafeteria had closed. Mm-hmm. So we went to another place in another building, and I've got a kind of stiff knee, so I didn't sit down that time, but we stood around for a while after having asked to be seated and served and being refused. The next thing that happened to me was that someone engaged me in a debate. One of the white men standing on the sidelines. He said he was an attorney, but he wouldn't tell me who he was, and we got to discussing the philosophy of the problem. Mm. And the next thing I knew, our mutual friend from your station asked me if I would mind coming over here to say a few words for the public, and I thought I might as well, and by that time the demonstration was sort of breaking up. I felt that everyone was being very careful not to cause any trouble. The police, I thought, did a superlative job. They were diplomatic, they were cautious. It was a very delicate situation, could have been trouble, and I thought they handled it very well. There were no arrests. I was not arrested, although I have just been served with a summons that notified me that I'm being sued for being a troublemaker, I guess.
Are you involved in this injunction?
Yes, mine is one of the names listed, although I wasn't there at the time that these other people who were listed were. Apparently earlier there had been folks carried away and so on.
Yes.
I was still at the hospital at the time and didn't see that. So that's what happened last Saturday to me.
Well, I would like to point out here, for the benefit of anybody who might be getting this for the first time, that, as you say, you gave a first-person account, and what you know. Also, as you referred to, though, there was, before you arrived there were a number of people who were bodily carried out to waiting patrol cars because I believe the building management determined that, or the fire department, I believe, wasn't it? Fire department? I don't know. Anyway, the fire department, I believe, determined that the fire exits, there was not a lane allowed open, and so they were physically carried away when they refused to move. This was before you came, and you were not arrested last weekend.
No. As a matter of fact, I've never been arrested.
Well, you probably came about as close last Saturday as you ever have. Let me ask you this. What is the purpose and what is the value, or is there any real value in such demonstrations? What do you believe these accomplish? Very much?
Well, it's difficult to judge what they accomplish. I feel that they probably accomplish less than the participants think that they are going to accomplish. And in the passage of time, it may very well turn out that people 25 years from now, looking back, will figure that those who participated in these demonstrations were more being moved by the spirit of the time rather than themselves bringing about any very great changes through their own actions. I think mostly that the demonstrators are caught up in a situation in which they feel it incumbent upon themselves, the colored people who participate, to do something to express the depth of their humiliation at being excluded from these public places. Mostly they have to live with these feelings without anything that they can do. And if some leadership appears that says, here is something you can do that will help, it's easy for them to follow such a lead. As far as blocking fire exits and things of that sort, I feel that it would be a mistake to pursue this line. I don't think that it would accomplish much either for such folks to do anything against what the court enjoins them. After all, the whole hope for the success of the school integration program rests in the willingness of everyone to abide by the law and to follow the dictates of the court and its interpretation of the law. So I feel that in so far as these demonstrations are valuable, they're valuable in that they call the attention of the community as a whole to a problem that exists. So easy for people to avoid thinking about painful problems, their own, and I as a psychiatrist am very aware of this, or of the world's. It's much easier to forget it all and go to the movies. But it's difficult to turn your back when folks are getting arrested or when large crowds are gathering and when people are obviously protesting and strong feelings are aroused. And if the community is indeed aroused, if the last vestiges of racial discrimination in public places, restaurants and so on, disappear as a result, then I feel it will have been worthwhile, and the discomfort and unhappiness of all concerned on both sides of any particular disagreement, like the one last Saturday, will have been for some good after all.
Well, you don't believe, then, that the demonstrations in and of themselves accomplish a great deal, that they are a result rather than a cause of any change.
Yes, I would say they are a reflection of a phase in the disappearance of racial segregation in this country, sort of the death throes of racial segregation. It's on its way out.
You don't, since you do not believe that they are a cause of a change, rather they are a result of a feeling in a situation that already exists, this leads me even more strongly to ask you, why in the world would you personally get involved in this? Regardless of how you may feel, if you think it's coming anyway.
Well, that's a question that I've been asked a good deal, both by friendly people and by anonymous telephone callers. And it's one I've given a lot of thought to. Why do I feel I must take part or at least stand up and be counted on some occasion in connection with this cause? And there are three reasons. I've outlined these in a letter to the Sunday paper, which might be printed, and writing them down has sort of crystallized them in my mind. The first reason, and perhaps in some ways the strongest reason, arises strictly from within, and it is, I suppose, in a sense, a matter of conscience. I'm a product of our culture, the Hebrew Christian tradition that influences all that grew up in the United States. Sometimes I even call myself a Christian, although I'm not sure I deserve to. To me, that means, among other things, a commitment to an ideal of the brotherhood of man. Now, if all men are brothers under God, you see, and some are being abused or hurt, or their feelings are being trampled upon, or unnecessarily they are being subjected to something I disapprove of, even though I may appreciate the fact that others don't feel as I do, and that their interpretation of Christianity is different from mine, and that their consciences don't speak to them as mine speak to me, I have to listen to the voice of my own. In one of Byron's poems, he says that conscience is the oracle of God. Very hard to know what's right and what's wrong, and in the end one has to rely upon the inner voice. In my case, that's the one I have to listen to, because that's the voice that speaks closest into my ear. Second reason, getting a little farther away from myself, is a political reason. It's a very proud political reason, and it's based upon the political heritage of this country. I'm very fond of this country. I've spent 11 years in uniform. I serve as a consultant to the government in several capacities now, and I'm keen on our country and how it got this way. When the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence started out, they said that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And what was the first one? That all men are created equal. And everything stems from that they have inalienable rights. Now, who is entitled to alienate these inalienable rights? Above the doors of certain places I see signs that say, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Well, I feel that there's a limit to what rights people can reserve to themselves. Sometimes I'm in great sympathy with people who reserve certain rights to themselves. For example, Thoreau reserved the right to spend his money the way he saw fit, and he wouldn't pay taxes because he didn't approve of the way the government was spending the money. And he went to jail on that account. He didn't stay in long, but he'd made his point. Now, I don't agree with Thoreau, even though I may not like the way they're spending the tax money, in that I feel that a nation, to survive, especially if we approve in a general way with its philosophy and activity, must at times do things that the individual doesn't admire or doesn't approve of. But those rights, those special rights that from the beginning have been held inherent, that have to do with the nature of a man, what he is, what he deserves, these are the things that cannot be violated in a general way without someone, without patriotic people getting aroused. To me, then, it's in the national tradition that the rights of the many especially insofar as they involve these ideals for which the country stands, must not be sacrificed to the right of a few. And of course we do this all the time. Whoever operates a cafeteria isn't completely free to do what he wants. He has to get a license before he can open it. He can't put up a sign saying, I reserve the right to serve liquor to minors. He can't put up a sign saying, I reserve the right to serve uninspected meat. These are for the protection of the public health, let's say, the public well-being, that they don't want people to get tapeworms. Well, as a psychiatrist, I tend to think about the public health in a broader way. There's the public mental health. To me, racial segregation is like a disease. It's disappearing. We're curing ourselves of it laboriously. It's a sort of last flare-up of the fever now. But one cannot stand aside. If I hold that these truths are self-evident, if, as someone has put it, freedom is deserved only by those who are willing to fight for it, I can't delegate to the NAACP my prerogative to stand up for what I think is right. To me, it is not a matter of the equality of the Negro. I don't view this as a Negro problem. That's why I wouldn't care to, I don't belong to the NAACP. I wouldn't be a member of it because this is a particular, a restricted problem. There are places in the world where the whites are the minority race. There is a country where no white man is allowed to vote or hold property. It's the concept that men are not equal, are not to be treated equally. In one store, if your skin is black, you can spend your money on anything, but you can't sit down to eat because it might offend someone. People are not entitled to use these personal sensibilities that they do have in such a way as to hurt others. In their own homes, they can segregate the dining table. In public places, I don't think so. Finally, and perhaps in some ways the vastest significant reason, it should be plain to anyone who reads the papers. Look what's happening in the world. The Western civilization is reaping a whirlwind of hatred as a result of the seeds of racism that we ourselves have sown in many parts of the world. And this is being used against us in a war that we're in. We're at war today. People are dying, are tortured and raped and suffering in a war that is essentially a war between a free way of life and communist tyranny. And one of the most effective weapons that's being used against us is the racial issue, because the vast bulk of the uncommitted peoples of the world, in whose hands the future lies, are colored. The whites are a minority on this globe. And every incident, every example, every tale of racial discrimination in the United States is a bludgeon used against us, so that anyone who deliberately prolongs this is, in a sense, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. To me, when you're in a war and you're committed and you're fighting for something you really believe in, people have to make sacrifices. They have to do things sometimes that's uncomfortable for them. They have to give up certain little luxuries and things. Racial discrimination of any type in this country today is a luxury that we cannot afford, and is a luxury our society cannot permit any individual to indulge in, because it jeopardizes the whole. The freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, the right to have private property, the right to earn a private profit, the right to run a private cafeteria is all at stake. And if people want to see their children inherit their cafeterias and run them in a free way and keep the profits and use them to do good in the way that they would like to choose, if we don't want to jeopardize all this, then we have to realize that we mustn't do things that are going to work against us. We can't give our enemies ammunition to use against us. I think that racial integration is going fast. Racial segregation is going fast. I feel it's amazing how much progress has been made. Furthermore, I think Oklahoma City is one of the most progressive and enlightened cities in which I've ever lived, including many northern cities where, racial antagonism is much stronger than it is in Oklahoma City. Furthermore, from what I understand, except for 2 or 3 restaurateurs in town, most of the businessmen who are in charge of public eating places see this and are willing to go along. But it should be unanimous, and the 2 or 3 holdouts, I guess, are making it difficult for everyone on both sides.
Yes, this is true.
Now, I don't think they're doing this because they want to betray the interests of the United States. I think they're doing it filled with a sense of righteous indignation, a sense of the pride of ownership in their own property, and the privilege to run their business the way they want to.
Also, they do it with a great fear of economic loss, or what they expect to be an economic loss.
Well, you know...
At least this is a reason they give.
That's a reason that's been given. I don't credit it too much, because if all would take the same action, then no single individual would suffer. I have been in most of the great restaurants in this country, in unsegregated cities. They all seem to be doing business very well. As a matter of fact, if our laws permitted the restaurateur to serve alcoholic beverages at the table, then it would be possible for them to improve the service all around and still make more money.
Yes. Let me ask you something else. You have 3 very great and 3 very compelling reasons for why you were downtown a week ago. You are a well-known psychiatrist, and the question has come to my mind several times, and particularly just listening to you for the last few minutes, as to how a psychiatrist looks at this from his profession, and how differently would you view the reasons for segregation, discrimination? How would you view this in a different manner from the way I would, or someone in another profession?
Well, I suppose in the practice of psychiatry, after a while, one becomes used to recognizing that things are not always what they seem, that motives which may be unconscious to a person may be more important in shaping his actions than the reasons he gives himself for what he's doing. In the case of prejudice, whether it be racial, religious, or of any other kind, the person frequently tells himself he's acting out of anger. Others may attribute to him this, that he is a hateful and despotic or bigoted person. Actually, he may be acting out of fear, and he may not appreciate the nature of the fears he has that lead him in sort of to prove to himself he's not afraid, to be antagonistic toward other people, or say to himself, I hate them, I can't stand them, and so on. Furthermore, when groups are involved, forces come into play that are pretty complicated. It's in any given instance, for example, a minority group may unwittingly conspire to bring upon itself more persecution without quite realizing the requirement for this. The whole subject of prejudice is a most complicated one. But one thing is certain, that when prejudice exists in a society to the point that overt manifestations of discrimination or persecution exist for reasons of race, color, religion, and so on, that insofar as a society is a living thing, this is a disease. It is always uneconomical to the society, community as a whole. The segregated schools were uneconomical. And it's uneconomical emotionally, too. Hatred takes time. It takes energy. It is time and energy that could be much better spent in other ways. The illness that is represented here, I think, is a part of a universal illness that comes out of the varieties of difficulty people have in permitting themselves to love each other. Now, the greatest physician of all saw this nearly 2,000 years ago, and I don't suppose anyone would have called him a psychiatrist, but he had profound insights into human nature. He's told people to love each other. In George Washington's prayer at the time of his inauguration, he pleaded that God would give all Americans the wisdom to love each other and to be brothers, every citizen to each other. That was, what, 1789 or something like that? I guess 1789, a long time ago, and still we haven't been able to do it.
We haven't made it.
We haven't made it yet. Oh. But in terms of our society as a whole, we are getting healthier as we grow. And if our society will only survive its most desperate struggle in history, then I feel the time will come when we can approach at least this ideal. Survival is the most urgent issue. That's why I feel that I have to stand up and be counted today. We can't afford to wait weeks or months or years for this gradually to die away, because our whole way of life will die away first.
This letter that you have written ought to be coming out in the first editions of the paper now if it gets printed this weekend. Is this outline some of your reasons as you've been giving them here for the last few minutes?
Probably put much more concisely and better, because I wrote it in the middle of the night.
Oh, really?
When I couldn't do much except put down enough words that would express it and still short enough so that a sensible editor might print it.
Let me ask you just something on a very personal level, if I may. Before we run completely out of time, you have referred a couple of times to comments from your associates and your friends, and some from people that you don't know, anonymous callers. A psychiatrist is supposed to understand what motivates his fellow man and probably be less sensitive. Have you found it but you are human, like all of us, and have you found this to be of any personal discomfort or anguish or a considerable problem since you went downtown last Saturday?
Well, as far as the anonymous callers are concerned, that doesn't bother me. I found a peculiar sensation when I was served yesterday with a summons. That was a new experience, and I didn't quite know how to feel. I think that the thing that has pained me the most has been that many of my friends in this community, people I love and admire and respect, have been unable to understand why I would do such a thing. They were offended by the idea of a private businessman's operation being assaulted by a mob, is how they look at it, and felt that for me to associate myself with what seemed to be a most irresponsible kind of thing was reprehensible. They were angry at me. I don't know whether my explanations that I've given you today will make any difference to them or not. But I feel that these reasons are bigger reasons, and that in the long run it'll be better for their children and my children if such reasoning prevails.
Dr. Lewis West, thank you very much for being with us again on Point of View on an entirely different subject from the previous visit when we talked about dreams. You've been very informative, and we appreciate your coming. Our guest today on Point of View was Dr. Lewis West, the head of the psychiatric department at the University of Oklahoma Medical School, and a widely and very well-known man in his field. That's a look at this week's Point of View. In a couple of weeks, the program, I would like to note, is going to be starting 30 minutes earlier. We'll be telling you about that just as we get into that time change. But until then, this is Dick John. Thank you and good afternoon. Dr. West's personal opinions as expressed on the preceding program were his own and do not necessarily reflect the views or position of the University of Oklahoma or the OU Medical School.